If you've ever had a situation where you've recorded the perfect vocal or guitar part, or any instrument for that matter, and it's just about as you would like it to be except for one particular verse or phrase, and you'd like to really focus on that particular area and record several different takes and choose the best take or even the best parts from several different takes, track layers and comping can help you achieve that. And that's what we're going to take a look at in this tutorial. Now, the layers and comping can also be used to record and experiment with different ideas. You can even import audio files or loops and comp those to come up with some creative mashups. So first, I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about layers and how they function, and then we'll take a look at using them in conjunction with comping to get our perfect take. So I'm going to press T to bring up the Add Tracks dialog. Let's just call this drums because we're going to work with some drum loops to start off with. The count of 1 is good, and actually I'll change the format to stereo. Let's click on OK. Now I chose stereo because the drum loops are probably going to be in stereo, but if you're recording a vocal or a guitar, usually that's just going to be mono. So just keep in mind that's the only reason why I'm changing this to stereo. That's not something that you necessarily need to do if you're working with a mono source. Now, if we come to the track column and take a look at our track header, at the very bottom here, we see we have drums 1, and this is actually the name of our layer. We have one track that's considered as a layer, layer 1. So if I click on this down arrow, then we can see we have the option to add a layer, duplicate, and rename a layer. Also remove, but we don't necessarily have added an additional one. So I'm going to manually add a layer, and I'll just keep the default of drums 2. Let's click on OK. And it doesn't seem like anything has happened here, but we now have this hamburger button that has shown up here. So if I were to Control Z to undo, then we can see that that has been removed here. But then if I come back to our layer, I'll go ahead and add that. Drums 2. OK, now we can see that here. And when I click on this, we can see our original drums 1 as it was labeled when we created the track, and then here we see we have drums 2. So this is our second layer that is now active here. Now I'm going to come again to the drop down menu. Let's add another layer. This one is drums 3. That's fine with me. Let's click on OK. So now we can see on our main track we have drums 3 that is active. We then have drums 1 and then drums 2. Now, if we would like to make one of these layers active on our main track, because whatever is on our main track is what we're going to hear back from Studio One. Anything that is on a layer below, we're not going to hear that. So I can come to this same drop-down menu and then say choose our original drums 1. Then that's going to now be active on our main track. And if we had something on that layer, it would be playing back. Now, we can also use the up arrows here. So here we have drums 2, drums 3. Right now we're on 1. So if I'd like to make drums 2 active, then I can click on the upward facing arrow. And then we can see now we have drums 2 as active. Our drums 1 is here, drums 3. If I'd like drum 3 to be active at the top, as you imagine, I can click on this up arrow. And now we have drums 3, drums 1, and drums 2. And I'd like to quickly mention that if we come to the inspector by clicking on the eye, then we can see we have our layers here as well. So this corresponds to whatever is active. We can see drums 3, but if I can click on the downward facing arrow, I can choose drums 1, and we can now see that that's active on our main track. Let's close out that inspector. Now let's come over to the loops tab here, and I'm going to click, hold, and drag this Alt Groove 1 into our main track, drums 1, and let's drag a couple more in here. I'll put that on the drums 2 layer, and we'll drag one more in. And I'm actually going to create one more additional layer, drums 4. So now we have our drums 1, 2, and 3 on the bottom layers here, and the newly created empty drums 4. Now I want to have an empty layer in here because once I start to show the comping feature, I just want to be able to make selections from the layers below that have material on them and have them populate up above. If we don't create this extra layer, then we can still do the comping, but it's going to get a little bit messy. So I definitely recommend creating an empty track if you're going to try to do some comping, especially if you're bringing in or importing audio files. Now let's first take a look at some of the controls that we have available for each of our layers. This is going to be the same for each one, so we'll just focus on this top one. Now if we click on the X, this is going to remove that layer out, so we no longer have our drums 1, but we'll go ahead and undo that. We next have duplicate. So as the name implies, if I click once on that, then we have duplicated our drums 1. We can see the waveform, these two match up together, but we'll also undo that. And then next we have solo. So without solo engaged, if I play this back, then we don't hear anything because any layer that has not been promoted to our main track is going to be silent. But if I were to press solo, then we can audition our individual layers. Next, we have a little color swatch here, and if I click on that, we can change the color of our layers. I'm going to make these very different from each other so that the changes that we make are going to be very obvious once we get to the comping. So we can now see our audio events have taken on the color that we've selected here. We can also double click and input a name in here if we're not happy with the defaults. And as we've seen, we have the up arrow to promote any particular layer to the top. So if we'd like drums 3 to be on our main track, we can click here. But I'm going to send the empty drums 4 layer back up to the top. Now, when I'm hovering on an audio event in one of these layers, we can see that our arrow tool, which we have active on our main track, is the arrow tool. But then as we come down to our layers and hover, we see that we have this special range tool that becomes active. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the snap on because I want to make the point that, as with most other tools, the snap is going to affect this special range tool as well right now. So we can see that my quantized value is set to quarter notes. So right now we are snapping to that quarter note subdivision. But now that this range tool is active, I can then click, hold, and drag. I'll drag to the left to select a range from this drum loop, and we can see that that populates on our main track here. Now I can come to our drums 2, click, hold, and drag to make a selection. We'll go all the way to the beginning of bar 4. And then lastly, we'll come to our drums 3. I'll click, hold, and drag to select this range, and then that is now promoted to the top. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to change the color of these to make them very different from each other, because we can see clearly here that when we're using a portion from a particular layer, we can see this is a bit more red and this is slightly grayed out, a bit more of a muted color, because we're not using any of this area up above, but we are using this, so we can see that's a bit more brightly colored. You can see on our drums 2, this is more brightly colored yellow because we're using that section up above. Now for our drums 3, as you can see, this is lightly colored in green because we're using this portion up above. Now we can actually come up to our main track here, and if you notice, we have this hamburger icon in the bottom left corner of each of these audio events. And when I click on this, we can actually make a different selection from our layers below. So just clicking once, we have this pop-up menu. I can select drums 1. Once I make that selection, we can see that this has the brighter red color, and this layer, drums 1, this portion, is now going to play back in our main track. But we'll undo that, and let's actually hear how this sounds with all of these comped together. Okay, so I think that's very clear there. And as I mentioned earlier, we can always, if we would like to hear a particular layer, we can solo it. Drums 1, I'll solo. Drums 3. You get the idea. Now, beyond soloing these individual layers, if you're trying to find a particular section that you are happy with and want to use up above, we can use the solo, but we also, when I press and hold Alt, we can see that we switch to the listen tool. So I'll release Alt. We now have that special range tool, but again, I'll press and hold Alt. And while I'm holding Alt and we have the listen tool active, I can click in any layer and that layer is going to be soloed automatically and playback from the position that I'm clicking. So if I come to bar 3 on drums 2, I'll click and hold, and as long as I'm holding with the left mouse button, we're going to audition that. If I come to the same area of drums 3, beginning at bar 3, okay, then we're going to hear that. If I want to hear drums 1 soloed from the beginning, I'll come to the beginning of bar 1, click and hold. Okay, so that's yet another way that you can audition the different areas to hear or to find the part that you are most happy with. Another quick note is that if I were to hold Control, notice our range tool then switches back to the arrow tool. But be careful when you have the arrow tool active, because if I were to come down to drums 3, I'm holding Control to have the arrow, and then when I click on this, then we can see that that automatically changes and promotes that section to the top up above. I'll hold Control again and then click here, and this red should change to our green drums 3, but we'll go ahead and undo those. And another thing that I'd like to mention is that even though by default we kind of switch to that special range tool as soon as we hover within our layers below, we can, for instance, say I'll press 2 to make the range tool active within the toolbar there. And with the range tool active, you see we have the kind of crosshairs. I'm going to click, hold, and drag to select this portion. Now, if you notice, when we have the range tool active, selecting this will not promote it to the top. We then have this outline of the up arrow that pops up after we've selected with the range tool. And then if I click on this, it's going to push that up to the top. Okay, I still have the range tool active. I'll come down to our drums 3. Let's click, hold, and drag to select this portion. And now we have that outline of the arrow. And as you can imagine, I'll click once. And now we have our drums 3 that's been promoted to our main track. Now, having the snap turned on works okay for us in this situation. And let's switch back to the arrow tool. When we are down below and that's snapping to our quarter notes, that works out fine in this situation. But you may have another situation where you're working with a different instrument and you want to be very precise. So let's actually zoom in a bit here. And I don't think we need the browser anymore. So right now, snapping to quarter notes. But then again, if we turn our snap off by clicking here or pressing in, then I can come in and make a cut, or selection rather, and it's not being affected by our snap. Okay, let's undo. And something else to keep in mind is that when let's make our main track a little bit larger here. When we make our selections below for our comping, Studio One is going to add crossfades here. So these are added automatically, but we can come to either end and adjust that crossfade. I can come to this end and adjust like so. And we can come to the center here and then click, hold, and drag down to create an exponential fade out. In the center, we have linear. And then once we go to the top, we have logarithmic. So if you're having problems with the transition being clean, or you're getting some clicks and pops, you can then come in here and adjust where the crossfade is positioned and its curve. Let's then zoom out. And at this point, I think now that we've covered how the different layers work and how the basic features of the comping work, let's put it all together in an instance where, say, we want to punch in and record a specific region over and over several times to try to get the best take. So I'm going to actually just Shift and T to remove that track out of there. Let's press T again to bring our Add Tracks dialog. And for this, let's just call this vocal, a count of 1. That's good, but I'm going to switch this to mono because I just have a mono mic. We'll press OK, or typically vocals are done in mono rather. And we're just going to use our imagination and pretend that I'm singing a ballad here and we have a portion of our song, maybe say at bar 3, between bar 3 and 5, that we just can't get right, and we'd like to record several takes here and either make use of one of those takes or take parts from each of those takes to use for our main track. I hope all of that made sense. So the first thing that we would do is set our loop region to the area, and our snap is off, so I'm going to turn that back on, of our song that we're having problems with and we'd like to record the several takes. So I've got that set here. We next need to activate our loop by coming to the transport and clicking here. You can also use the / on your QWERTY keyboard. Let's arm for recording. And we'll come back to the beginning of our song here. Usually you'll want to hear the instrument or vocal a bit before where you're going to be entering into record. Now we just have silence, but again, we're using our imaginations here. Now, at this point, all I need to do is enter into record, and you specifically want to press record. Since we set our loop region, and then we come here to our transport, and this is important, we need to activate auto punch. You can also press I. So now we see that that's red, and Studio One will automatically begin recording once we get to the loop region, as long as we have our auto punch active. I'm going to then again press the record button. Pressing play is not going to get you there. So we need to press record. Check 1, 2. This is a test. This is a test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3. This is a test. Okay. So now we've made several passes and we've recorded our amazing ballad. The last take is empty here because I didn't really say anything, but that's all that is. But the important thing is, if you notice here, we now have this little hamburger icon in the bottom left corner of our audio event. And if I click once on that, we can see all of the different takes. So if I wanted to play back take 1, then I can select that. And you see that is a full event because we recorded one full pass. And that should be the same for our take 2, as well as our take 3. And it's the take 4 where I stopped recording partway through here. Now, if you're totally happy with one of the takes that you did, then you could just simply choose it from the drop-down menu here and you're good to go. You can just use that. But if it's a particularly complicated piece and you feel like some parts were good on one take and other parts were good on another, then we can expand these takes out to our layers. So if I right-click on this event, then we can see that we can also select a take from here, just the same as the drop-down menu that we're using there. But then we have the option to unpack takes. So we can unpack takes to tracks, which is going to create discrete audio tracks, which is not what we're taking a look at. That's not what we want for this video. We can unpack takes to new layers. That is what we want. And if we had set up some pre-existing layers, we can choose to unpack them there. But we didn't create any new layers, so I'm going to choose unpack takes to new layers. I'll click once, and now we can see that we have 4 different layers created for our 4 different takes. And Studio One has automatically created this 5th track, the main track, that's going to hold our comps that we make from down below here. So if we take a look at the top left corner, we can see vocal take 1, and this is vocal take 1 as well. And I'm just mentioning that because I had said that it's a good idea, if you're importing audio files, for instance, then to go ahead and create an additional empty take so that when you're making your selections, they'll be populated up top, and it's just a bit cleaner this way. Studio One does that for us automatically. So now that we have our different layers, we can audition each one by soloing.
This is a test 1, 2, 3, 4,
to find
5, 6. This is a test 2.
Which one that you are happy with, and listen to the different parts to see if you want to mix and match. And as I mentioned, let's turn the solo off of vocal take 3, and then I'm going to hold Alt just to remind you that once I hold Alt, we have the listen tool.
1, 2, this,
and that's going to solo
5, 6.
That layer and begin playback
3, this is a
from wherever you
2, 1,
left click and hold. And for our vocal take 4, this one doesn't have any recording on it, so we can actually make use of the X button here to delete that layer out. And since we recorded narration, I'm going to go ahead and turn the snap off by clicking here, because we can see that these are falling in different areas, unlike our drums where a lot of the kicks and snares are falling near certain beats and grid lines. This is going to allow us to be a bit more precise. So maybe I would like to include this portion here. So that special range tool is active. I'll go ahead and click, hold, and drag. Then we can see that that has been promoted to the top. And let's again change our colors to make this very obvious. I'm going to choose the red for there. For this one, I'll choose the yellow. And for this, let's choose the green. I just would like for this to be very obvious. Okay, so we can see our vocal take 2 has this lighter red, letting us know that that's being used there. And let's select this range from our vocal take 3. And now we can see that this has the lighter yellow color, and then it has been promoted to the top. And let's actually give this a listen.
check 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, a test 1.
Okay, now another thing that we can do is come to our main track and just hover at the edges here, and we can make an adjustment to the length of these events at the top. Let's undo that. And if I have the 2 arrows that are both highlighted, we can click, hold, and drag and adjust both at the same time. Now there's a difference between if I move a little bit to the left, then we can see that this changes there. You can see we have one highlighted arrow to the right and the other one's a little bit grayed out. This is going to function differently. We're just adjusting that first audio event. So if you specifically would like to adjust both the end and beginning of 2 events that are adjacent at the same time, be sure you have the 2 highlighted arrows. Then you can make the adjustment like so. You can see that reflected in our layer below. Again, coming over to this edit here, we've got the 2 highlighted arrows. I can then tailor this and just take note of vocal take 1 and vocal take 3 in the layers below. I'm adjusting the range up top on our main track, and we can see the selection is then being adjusted below as well. So let's give this one a listen.
Check 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3. This is a test 1.
Now, typically, if you're going to use the comping in this sort of way where you're trying to get a vocal part right that's part of a verse or an instrument passage, it's going to be pretty much the same thing for each one, just played different times. So if you've made some selections up above or down below rather, and you're just not sure, maybe this first part here, you're not sure which take is the best, you can make that selection and then you can click on the hamburger button in the left corner and then audition the different ones. Just keep playing this back while it's in loop, and then you can make different selections here to really pick and choose which parts are going to suit you the best. Now, once you've found the best parts, one thing that you can do is click, hold, and drag to select all of these events on our main track. I'm going to press G, and now these are going to be merged into an audio part. And if I double click on this, we can see that in our editor, these parts are still separate and we could make adjustments there. But these are now grouped as one, and I can actually click, hold, and drag this to a different area of our song. And if you notice, our events down below are following along with our event up above. And this is going to be the default behavior. If we come to the inspector by clicking on the eye, then we can see layers follow events is checked. If I deselect that and then move this audio event, that will not then take along these layer events with it. Let's go ahead and reselect that. Turn our snap on to get that just right. And now that these are grouped, we may want to bounce this down to a new audio track. If it's a vocal, we may want to work on it in Melodyne, for instance. So we can right click on this, and I'm going to come to Audio, and actually we want to go to Event here. And then we can see we have bounced to new track. So you could also press Control, Alt, and B. I'll go ahead and click once on this. And now we have all of our takes. Let's close out the editor. All of the takes that the portions of our takes that we chose for our one amazing perfect piece have been bounced down to an audio file here on a brand new track. So if we'd like to work with Melodyne on this, I can then press Control and M as in Mary, and then that's going to open up our Melodyne. And one final tidbit that I'd like to end with is that after we recorded our takes, we right-clicked on our audio event and chose to unpack layers to takes as an additional step. But if we come to our transport, then we can see here we have this button, Record Mode Replace. That is not what we want. We actually want the gear icon below it, which is Record Panel. So I'll click once on that. Then we can see we have Record Mode. And if I were to make this active, takes to layers, and then again, let's set up a loop here, and let's actually delete these other takes out just so that this is all more clear. And we'll delete this audio event out as well. So now our auto punch is still active. We've activated takes to layers. The track is armed for recording. I'll go ahead and press record. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'll press stop, and then now we can see Studio One automatically unpacks those takes 2 layers below our main track. All right, so this is how we can go about working with layers and comping within Studio One. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Also, if you would like to shorten your learning curve for Studio One, I do provide one-on-one training over Zoom. So there's information for that in the pinned comment below, as well as the description of this video. Our meeting can be recorded. If you'd like, you can provide me control of your Studio One application, and I can show you directly how to accomplish different actions and use the various features with it that are in Studio One. So instead of spending hours searching online or through the manual, I can answer your questions in a matter of minutes. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.